Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yesterday we mentioned that if everyone can bring their Quran with them, or at least have their Quran open on their apps, their phones. This evening, the central verse that we're going to be speaking about, inshallah, it will come from Surah Al-A'raf and Surah Hud, with the stories of Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam. So we'll be going across these two particular chapters. And inshallah, you and I will be able to focus on those verses. For all of our marhumeen, if we can begin with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. For the love of the master of the martyrs, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. For the love of Lady Zainab and Sayyidah Kulthum, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And for the awaited savior of humanity, master of our age, Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس ليذيقهم بعض الذي عملوا لعلهم يرجعون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. How do you and I make profound change in our lives? If the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the objective of which was for reform within the ummah of his grandfather, and to be able to bring things back to the time of his grandfather and his father, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, how do you and I ensure that our own Muharram and Safar and this year is in line with the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam? Each year, you and I participate in the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and hope to be able to make changes, a reform within our own lives, such that the coming year we are different people. The challenge we have is that as much as our intention wants to be able to propel us forward, there are always personal and environmental circumstances that pull us back into the everyday actions, into the grind of the things that we do. How can we actually break from that such that when we make an intention to reform one aspect of our lives, there is genuine reform that has been made? Yesterday, we started our series about how we can make change within the world that we are living in, and to be able to make change in the way that responds to the pandemic such that we are able to alleviate some of the oncoming challenges that we are facing head on. We started the series yesterday by making certain assumptions. We stated, number one, that when the pandemic began, we were told that this is a once-in-100-year event. History testifies otherwise. Actually, there are endemics once every 9 years on average, and there are pandemics once every 20 years. And that these events tend to last anywhere between 18 to 30 months. And so if we had been told that from the outset, our approach could have been in line with some of that particular timescale. We started the pandemic by saying, how long will this last? We started it by saying, we're only going to have to deal with these changes for a few weeks, for a few months. If the country, if the economy, if those in the healthcare professions had been told that the changes we need to be able to make to our lives might be up to 30 months long, then we as a community could have understood the changes that needed to take place incrementally in order to be able to manage the challenges ahead of us. That tells us that we need to furnish ourselves with the very best information that is available to us. We were also made aware yesterday that many of the scientists are informing us that the ways in which we are living would bring about similar challenges, ongoing challenges like this, and instead this might become a cyclical event once every 10 years. Our series wants to query, how do we ensure that this does not occur? How can we make fundamental changes in the way in which we are living such that the crises that surrounds us, be it the pandemic or the environmental catastrophe that is upon us, such as global warming, how do we make changes in our lives such that we can alleviate some of these challenges that are in front of us? The third assumption was Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi, may Allah preserve him, told us in a statement prior to this Muharram that we need to we need to respond with pandemic like we did with Daesh. In the same way that there has to be the seriousness of thought and infrastructure put in place, we need to be able to put this in place to respond to the waba the same way that we have done to Daesh. Number four, if we are able to make certain changes and reforms in our lives, collectively as well as individually, surely this would be a proper response, a befitting response to the movement that we are commemorating in these ayyam of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Let us mention one or two points that we need to expand upon from yesterday in order to be able to go into tonight's discussion. We started by asking yesterday about crises and what happens when a crisis occurs. We stated that when a crisis occurs, some of the ideas that seem impossible to us are all of a sudden implemented. We see homeless on the streets, but now we realize that when the pandemic started, it was very easy to be able to house them. In fact, you may have seen just in the last couple of days, there's an article that has been circulating about Finland and how Finland has actually decided to put all homeless people in permanent housing. Not give them just shelter and then say by the end of the morning you need to leave. Maybe if you happen to come back in the afternoon and shelter is available to you, maybe you can find it again. This is what tends to happen with our charitable services. The government in Finland has decided to eradicate homelessness and give every person a house. When they did the analysis, it actually became cheaper for the government to do this than actually the way in which they were looking after the homeless community without giving them permanent shelter. Ideas are always available to us. And in a crisis, what you will normally find is that those ideas that seemingly are impossible to us to be able to implement, they are the ones that become enacted and become normalized because we have to change our behaviors. Hands up, how many people here had to work from home during the pandemic? Hands up so we can see, everyone can look around and just see the numbers. I'm going to estimate that that's about more than half of those adults in the audience had to work from home. Now, of you, hands up again, how many was this the norm for prior to the pandemic? Only the Sayyid, mashallah. And one at the back or two at the back. So that's a tiny number compared to how many actually made that change. If you went to your, not you Sayyid, because I don't know what you were doing before the pandemic that you allowed you to work from home normally. But if you went to most places of business and said to your boss, I want to work from home from now, what would they have said to you? Pack your bags, yeah, and I look forward to sending you your P45 or something like that, right? But now it's actually become the norm. The shift has occurred. And you know, because capitalism rules here, you know that if your productivity had even dropped by 1%, they would be dragging you back into those offices as quickly as possible. It's not because they're looking after your mental health or your health, but in the whole, as a country, they would not allow a dip in their capitalization. But once we realize that people can work from home and care about their job and do a good job, and productivity will not drop necessarily, we've seen how shifts in behavior have been allowed, something that just 18 months ago was impossible for us to be able to imagine. Behaviors can very quickly change in a crisis. And we begin to realize that when the ideas are available to us, or when a crisis pushes us in a particular direction, the very best of those ideas that are available to us often become picked up. And of course, if you and I are not participating in providing ideas, solutions, then when the opportune moment comes about, we will not have our ideas there to be able to present. Hold on to that, because when it comes to the Islamic ideas of reform, we need to have them in circulation. Otherwise, people will not be able to go in those directions. Can you see that? If our voice is not present, if the solutions we want to offer are not available, then who is going to be able to take up the solutions that the Muslim community has to offer, that the Quran has to offer? Now, actually, this idea, the one that I've tried to concisely present to you, is not a theory that I have created. Actually, it's a very famous economic theory. One of the godfathers of the liberal age, by the name of Milton Friedman, he was a giant economist, especially of this era, created this idea and said that in crisis, often, whether it be a real crisis or an imagined crisis, this is what produces real change within society. And then he elaborated on this idea that whatever ideas are in circulation, are lying around at that time, that will win the day. Now, the reason as to why he presented this idea was because he was a fervent capitalist. His idea was that if the marketplace wants to be able to capture opportunities, always keep yourself at the tip of the opportunity of a crisis. Maximize the crisis at hand. This came to be known as disaster capitalism. When a disaster occurs, you will often see that giant conglomerates, corporations, they swoop in, don't they? They take advantage of the situation. If you had invested in Pfizer 18 months ago, you would have reaped the benefits of it. If you had invested in Amazon, you would have reaped the benefits of it. Do you know how much market capitalization, especially those businesses that are doing deliveries, Deliveroo and things like that, can you imagine the amount of money that they have made compared to what they were starting with 2 years ago, 3 years ago? The marketplace understands how to capitalize on crisis. The challenge has been that we have not understood how to capitalize on crisis. This idea by Friedman was then adopted. And actually, there is a great work that I will humbly recommend to all of you who are, especially students, university students. Avail yourself of this particular work by a great author by the name of Naomi Klein. Klein wrote a work called The Shock Doctrine. She based the book on Friedman's idea. The idea that when there's a crisis, the marketplace should take advantage and make sure the solutions go through the market instead of the needs of the people. So you make the rich richer, and of course, those people who are disoriented during a crisis, like you and I, because we're fighting with each other, because we don't know what is truth and what is false, because we're being pushed from pillar to post, whilst we're constantly fighting with each other, the marketplace captures the moment and maximizes it to their benefit and to our disadvantage. Klein wrote her work in response to Friedman and wrote the work, The Shock Doctrine, that when a shock takes place, how people have to be aware of the market capitalizing on the opportunities and not fall into those traps. And actually for people to come together to make those changes instead of the market making those changes for us. Because then the market will take the direction and you and I will be forced to go in that direction. As opposed to saying that we see a crisis in front of us, what changes need to be made permanently such that you and I can make a change within society. Society can be better, not worse, at the end of the crisis. The homeless was an example. We very easily could remove homelessness tomorrow. Everything could change. You may have heard of something called universal basic income. And the idea that every person should be entitled to a minimal amount so that no person falls below the breadline, no human being falls into poverty. When the crisis started, this was in circulation again. This idea is absolutely hated by the right, absolutely hated by the idea of market capitalization, unless and until they can take advantage of it. Whoever imagined that furlough would happen, that a percentage of people's income would be provided for? You can see here the theory that is coming around for you and I. The reality is that we actually have great power to be able to make change. How many people do you know? I imagine throughout your life, you will know 1,000 people at least. And those 1,000 people will know 1,000 other people. Very quickly, our ideas can move from one person to another, and very quickly reach 1 million people. And very quickly reach 1 billion people. It just requires us to understand the opportunities that are available the power that exists within us individually and collectively, and then to be able to harness those powers for a better world that we live in. I'll give you an example of what we're fighting. You may have heard that in 2015, there was the Paris Climate Treaty Accord. Do you remember this? Everybody remember? In 2015 in Paris? Trump pulled out of it, right? The only country in the world to pull out of it. Fine. You know, even though this was signed in 2015 and a commitment to be able to slowly reduce and completely remove ourselves from the reliance on things like oil, things like this that will continue to cause us damage to the environment, the G7 countries, the most powerful countries in the world, collectively, every year give $660 billion in subsidies to the oil industry. 2015, the commitment was made. Only last year and the year before, still $660 billion in subsidies. When we say subsidies, we mean when we say the government gives money, where does the government get the money from? You and me. It's not government money, it's mine and your money. It's our tax money that goes into this. There's one thing, us knowing that there is a crisis, and there is another thing, us actually making changes so that we alleviate and respond to the crisis itself. The ayah that is the central verse to our theme, our series, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ. That fasad has appeared on the land and on the seas by what man's hands have wrought, what you and I have done. And then Allah explains, why does Allah allow this fasad to appear? لِيُذِيقَهُمْ بَعْدَ الَّذِي عَمِلُوا لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. So that they may taste a part of that which they have done. And again, Allah explains why He allows us to taste a part of what we have done, so that we may return back to Him. Now, if you and I want to be able to make change, which is going to be the theme of our series and what changes we can practically make, we first need to be able to think about how to make change within our life. This is one of the hardest things to do. Imam Ali alayhi salam in the books of ahadith has entire abwab. There's actual chapters on habit and the development of habit and how hard it is to break our behaviors and our habits. You know, it doesn't take us 40 days of action to be able to do something to create an addiction to something. Sometimes it just means to do it once. That is sufficient for us in the way in which our neural pathways are created for us to have that action as a permanent feature within us. And it takes so much to be able to break. Ask yourself for a moment, reflect on this question for a minute yourself. How many times have you come in the month of Muharram, in the month of Shahr Ramadan, in the month of Safar, when you have gone on ziyarah, when you have gone on hajj, when a crisis has occurred in your life, when you've made a commitment to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, I will change this behavior, and that you've not been able to change it? Just reflect for a minute. Ask yourselves honestly. I know in my heart of hearts how often we say, I want to start doing this. I want to break from this. How difficult it is for us to be able to do that. For us to be able to call upon the rest of the world to make basic changes requires by priority, bil awlawiyya, for you and I to make those changes in our life first. There's no way I can say to the outside world, Why aren't we making these changes to make our planet safer for ourselves and for our children if you and I are not making those changes ourselves? Therefore, tonight, we need to focus on the question of how change and reform can be brought about in our own lives. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu asks this question in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Now I'm focusing on this. Not Ya ayyuhan nas, not Ya ahl al-kitab, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Who is being addressed? Me and you. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. Oh, you who believe, why do you say that which you don't do yourself? Why will you tell others, have an expectation of the government, have an expectation of others to make a tangible change in their own lives, to be able to ward off the challenges that are afoot, unless you and I can make those changes significantly in our own lives first? Allah Jalla Jalaluhu follows up with this ayah, lima taquluna ma la taf'alun, by saying, it is indeed egregious to Allah that you say to others to do something when you don't do it yourself. And so in this series, we're going to advise ourselves to be able to make certain changes. I need to be able to make those changes myself before telling you, and you and I need to be able to make those changes before inviting the rest of the world to be able to make some of these changes. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about islah, reformation and reform, on a number of occasions. The homework yesterday was for you to be able to search in the Quran where Allah Jalla Jalaluhu speaks about reform, and in particular to look at the story of Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam. I want to review these ayat about Shu'aib alayhi salam and see the pathology of his people. Which city was Shu'aib alayhi salam at? The city of Madian. Jazakumullah khair. You know better than me that when Allah Jalla Jalaluhu provides a story in the Quran, it is a story that is going to reverberate throughout time. That whether you and I live in London or Calcutta, today or tomorrow, this story is going to be something that is a baseline example for you and I. The way in which the Prophet himself actually comes and speaks to his community, and the way in which the community respond, it becomes an example for the way in which communities react to when prophetic figures call upon reform. Let's have a look at some of these verses, and they're in Surah Al-A'raf and Surah Hud and amongst different places. So I'm going to read them for you and I, inshaAllah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Shu'aib alayhi salam presents himself to his community. He is from his own community, so he knows the actions of his own community. He starts with the following. ما أريد أن أخالفكم إلى ما أنهاكم عنه. I do not intend to be able to call you to something that I am not doing myself. This is a wonderful explanation of لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون. Why is it that you say that which you do not do yourself? A prophet of Allah starts with this, that you will see from me before I advance my da'wah to you. I remember one of the Maraja al-Kiram, he was giving advice to the Khutaba. This is a couple of years back before starting the Muharram program. Maraja often will give advice to their tullab, to their followers, and say, look, this is what I would like you to focus on this Muharram, these are the circumstances, and so on. One of the Maraja was giving advice to the Khutaba, and he said, look, before you go on the pulpit and say anything to anyone, make sure you have done that action yourself before you say it from the pulpit. He gave an example. He said, imagine tonight You're going to come on the pulpit and you're going to speak about charity. Ala sabil al-farad, for example. You're going to give advice, brothers, it's good to give charity. Brothers, make sure that you give charity before you leave home. Before you tell someone else to do it, make sure you have done it. Make sure even if it's 1 penny, he didn't say 1 penny, I'm telling you, like 1 dirham. Even if it's 1 penny, make sure you have given it before you tell someone else to do it, such that there is no hypocrisy that comes within yourself. Beautiful advice for all of us. ما أريد أن أخالفكم إلى ما أنهاكم عنه. I'm not going to tell you something that I'm going to do the opposite to myself. إن أريد إلا الإصلاح ما استطعت. All I want is reform to the extent of what is possible. A prophet knows the capacity of people. He knows the potential for change and how quickly that change is going to occur, who is going to respond well and who is going to respond negatively. Not everyone agrees with everything. And there are going to be some people that even if you speak the most obvious things to, they may not agree and they may not understand it from your perspective. I want to bring about changes as much as is possible within this community, Shu'aib alayhi salam says. Now, he lists the things that he wants to be able to change. And what I'd like you to focus on, brothers and sisters, is the things that he asks for change, and not just the specifics, what they represent. What's the problem that's occurring in the society for these actions to have taken place? You know that there is cause and there is cause and effect. There is the starting problem and then there's the symptoms of that problem. They're not the same, are they? Think about what Shu'aib alayhi salam is saying about what's happening in his community and what is actually at the actual point of the problems of that society. And then have a look at how they respond to Shu'aib alayhi salam. Number one, Ya qawmi, O my community, i'budullah ma lakum min ilahin ghayruh. Worship Allah. There is no Lord other than Him. Which tells you what? That their worship was not of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Him to have to tell them to do this. فَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ. And weigh and measure, balance properly. You know that the problems of Shu'aib's community was what? That they used to cheat people when it came to the scales. That if they could get away with it, they would weigh it in such a way that they would make more money, form of theft from people. Think about this carefully. Shu'aib alayhi salam knows this is occurring in his community. Either Shu'aib alayhi salam knows it because someone is coming and telling him, or maybe he's been a victim of it. Shu'aib alayhi salam himself then, when he says, Ma ukhalifakum, I'm not going to do opposite to you, it means that Shu'aib alayhi salam had to be able to demonstrate how to be a just storekeeper, a just trader, such that when someone came to buy something from him, he demonstrated to the people how to be able to live justly. Does that make sense? It wasn't Shu'aib alayhi salam only calling them. He himself had to live his truth in order for the next shopkeeper to see that when a person came to Shu'aib alayhi salam to say, I want some, cake, I want some, fruits, I want something from you, he actually weighed it in a just way. Similarly for you and I, it is not only just speech, it is to live the things that need to be lived, that in our actions someone sees it and then they know how to be able to live correctly. Not everybody learns the same way. Not everybody likes to have majlis. Not everybody likes to be lectured to. Some people see good behavior and they adopt good behavior. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, has a Important narration. He says it suffices you to be able to change your behavior. It suffices you that when you see in others what you do not like, it suffices that you learn from that behavior that you do not like, that it should not be present in you. Sometimes we see behaviors from people. Why are you doing this? Sometimes it's online, sometimes it's in person. One of the best ways to be able to make changes is to say, I don't like what's happening there. I don't want that act to be in me. And the opposite is also true. That when you see someone's good behavior, you say to yourself, I wish I was like that guy. I wish I had his patience. I wish I acted the way in which she acted in that moment. And so it sets a standard by the way in which others can make change, and reform happens within the family, within the community, within the state. فَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ. And do not devalue, do not diminish what people have, what their rights are, what people are actually owed to them and to their own things. وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا. And do not cause corruption in the land after it has been made good. Reform is one thing where you have to change what is wrong. But actually, one of the most important parts of the discussion we're going to have is that we're not allowed to be able to corrupt something that is actually going well, something that is actually strong. Last week, there was an analysis that was put out. 10 countries, the United States, Canada, Switzerland, Sweden, France, Germany, England, 10 countries of the leading economically advanced countries. What is the relationship between the level of healthcare and the cost of healthcare? What's the outcomes? Do you know, prior to only a couple of years ago, which country was the strongest country in the world for the relationship between investment and outcomes when it comes to their healthcare system? Anyone know? Yeah, the UK, the NHS. Do you know, in the last couple of years, we've dropped to 4th. Why? There's a systemic devaluing of the NHS, isn't there? A defunding of the NHS. A commoditization of the NHS. لا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها. You are prohibited to corrupt the earth when it has been made good. The institutions that you inherit, you have to be able to keep it to a certain level and improve on it if possible. That requires investment, doesn't it? It requires evolution, tatawurat. We'll talk about this more as the nights continue, inshaAllah. وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا. Shu'aib alayhi salam says, وَلَا تَقْعُدُوا بِكُلِّ صِرَاطٍ تُوعِدُونَ وَتُصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. And Shu'aib says, you are not permitted. Do not sit in every street, in every opportunity, making people threatened or threatening people with your behavior. وَتُصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and blocking them from the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, brothers and sisters, I want you to answer me a question here. These reforms that Shu'aib alayhi salam is calling Madian to, are they difficult to understand? Worship Allah. There's no Lord other than Him. Balance properly and weigh properly. Don't diminish from people and what is owed to them. Don't corrupt after something has been made good. And don't turn people away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is any of it difficult for you and I to understand? Listen to the response of the people of Shu'aib alayhi salam. Ya Shu'aib, ma nafqahu kathiran mimma taqul. We don't understand much of what you're saying. Don't worship any other than Allah. Difficult to understand? Don't cheat people. Difficult to understand? No. Why do you think they responded in this way? Either they genuinely didn't want to understand what was being said, or something was blocking them from understanding what had been said. Sometimes, when we get asked to be able to make changes in our life, they're so evident. In fact, sometimes they're self-evident to you and I. If you and I sit alone for 5 minutes and just think about some of the destructive behaviors that occur in our own life, we could write a page on them, I'm sure. They're self-evident, aren't they? Some of the destructive behaviors that we do. We know them off the top of our head without having to think about them because we are so affected by them. Imagine now when a prophet of God with the perfect tongue to explain to his own community says so evident things. You are cheating people. This is the system of your community. Stop doing this. فَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ. And they say, we don't understand what you're saying. What's being said is, either we don't want to understand what you're saying, or genuinely we can't fathom it because we are so blocked from it that there is a hajiz, there's something that's stopping our intellect from being able to understand what's being said. Ya Shu'aib, ma nafqahu kathiran mimma taqul wa inna lanaraka fina da'ifa. And the second reason why they rejected Shu'aib alayhi salam, we see you as weak amongst us. We're the powerful. We're the rich. We're the right. Therefore, whatever you say, we don't accept. These are blocks to us making change within our life. The story of the people of Madian is actually a story for you and I. That sometimes we know the solutions that exist in front of us. They're just there to grab, but something says, I don't understand this. I don't want to put the effort into this. This is something that's too difficult for me. Someone's going to mock me if I do this. Or sometimes when it reaches us, we actually say, nah, who it's coming from, I'm not interested in. We won't give that person a chance. The Quran is telling us the pathology of these people that stop genuine reform from happening within the community. I have to reflect on myself. Do I have those qualities in me like the people of Shu'aib alayhi salam? If I do, then what is the difference between me and the people of Madian? If I was living in that community in Madian, I would have acted the same way in which they acted. And if Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam came to me, or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, or the awaited Savior, Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif comes to me and says, make reform, because my pathology is the same and I'm so used to blocking reform. What makes me think I would act any differently to the people of Shu'aib, differently to the people of the Quraysh, differently tomorrow when the awaited comes? Salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'een. I mentioned to you earlier on, one of the books that I recommend, especially students, university students, for you to read. You've got the summer. Take advantage of the summer. Don't think that just because we're off for 2 months that we don't continue our studies. We do. Holiday is not an Islamic word. There was no day off for the Prophet. Yeah? لِمَا تَقُولُ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. I go on holiday as well. Yes? But I'm just saying, even on your holiday, continue to put effort into your soul. There's an important book by the name of The Great Derangement. Please make a note. Go into your searches or your notes and just write it down. The Great Derangement. The author is Amitav Ghosh. He says that continuing to do the same cultural and educational practices when faced with a crisis in front of you, without engaging the crisis, without making any practical change, is actually a form of derangement. If I came on this pulpit and I started talking to you about things that are not happening in the world, that aren't mattering, whilst there's a crisis occurring in front of our eyes, it's a derangement, Ghosh says. And for us to not make any cultural changes and educational changes, whilst those crises are occurring and falling upon us, it is a derangement, he says. I want to be able to leave us with 3 small points that might benefit you and I in reforming ourselves. The first one is that no matter your age, no matter your position, you are able to reform yourself. Whether you are marja or whether you are an ordinary individual, whether you are 15 or whether you are 51, you can all make reform in your life. Once, the great companion Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, and you all know the daraja of Jabir. This is an individual who had 17 battles with the Prophet. A person who gives to us so much of our history. A person who was the first za'ir of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Arba'in. Is there a person higher than Jabir, really? The end of his life, he's very elderly. He's blind. Our fifth Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, comes to him and says, Jabir, tell me, how is life? You know, sometimes we ask each other, how's it going? We say, what's up? What's new? Imam alayhi salam says to Jabir, how's life? How's life treating you? Jabir was really elderly, 90 years old. Jabir had gone through much illness. Jabir was blind. Jabir was poor. It's not easy for a 90-year-old man to live in the state in which he was living in. Jabir responds by saying, Ya ibn Rasulullah, you know, I'm so ill, all I want is release. I'm so old, all I look forward to now is death. It's an ordinary response, isn't it? Someone will say, I'm done now. Ya Allah, just take me to heaven, I'm ready. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam told him, this is not the way for you to answer, O Jabir. Imagine, 90 years old, greatest companion. Imagine the maqam of this individual, even at his age. Imam alayhi salam says, change how you respond to this question. It's not appropriate of you, Jabir, your station. You know how he responds? He says, O Jabir, your Imam, he is not displeased with any state that Allah puts him in. Rather, he finds himself pleased with whatever state Allah puts him in. If he's in health, he's happy with health. If he's in illness, he's also happy with illness. If he's in life, he's happy with life. And if he's in death, he'll still be happy with death. Oh Jabir, change your thinking and your reaction. Last days of his life, and the Imam is still saying, reform, change yourself. Number one, for anyone who wants to be able to reform, don't think that there is no time for you. Don't imagine that you and I cannot change our behaviors, no matter how hard it may be. The second thing you and I can do to be able to make change is that we need to be able to reflect on our life and our behaviors. What you might call a situational analysis of our own life. The biggest thing that you and I should put effort into is our own lives. You will say, of course, I will say, yeah, but I tell you what, the majority of people on this earth put more effort into people's lives who do not matter than their own lives. There was a very interesting survey that was done to students, university students. Questionnaire: how many hours a day do you waste and how? And most students said that they waste around 4 hours a day on the internet. So what are they doing? Scrolling through social media, watching YouTube videos, those types of videos that at the end of it, they don't remember anything from the first one. They haven't benefited one iota. At the end of it, it only makes them more depressed. They only go further down the rabbit hole that they first started with. And again, لِمَا تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. I do this more than anyone else. I'm admitting it. Said, I want to reform myself and try to make slow changes before anything else. Imagine 4 hours a day invested in people's lives who on the day of judgment are going to run a mile from you. And wallahi, you will run a mile from them. Honestly. You think any of those people are going to care one iota for you on the day of judgment? All those people that you've been scrolling through? All of those people that you've been following? All those people that you've been... You think they're going to care? I stalk this person. I check out what this person's doing. None of it matters. Imagine if you put that much effort into yourself as those people that don't care one iota about you. Imagine how far you and I could go. And it starts with this genuine effort into our own selves and to treat yourself as you deserve to be treated. And to let go of those things and those practices that you wish to be able to let go of. Sometimes it can be very easy. There's low-hanging fruit. Imagine the one thing you want to be able to stop doing. Imagine it now. What's the one big detrimental act that you do in your life that stops you from becoming the person you want to become? And imagine if you could stop doing that one action and how much effort you could put into just stopping that one action and the outcome that would change within the rest of your life. Just imagine it. Imam Ali alayhi salam has that famous hadith, I sat at the gates of my heart and I let none in other than my Rabb. I sat at the gates. I was conscious. I didn't let anything else in. Imagine that one behavior that you could change that would have such a ramification on the rest of your life. Wonderful story of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Hussein Burajaddi, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. Sayyid Burajaddi, marja of the highest level, was in his dars. Once he was sitting and he was teaching, and a student kept interrupting, kept standing up, asking questions, kept interrupting, kept butting in. After a few minutes, Sayyid al-Burajaddi, he became so angry, he lashed out at the student. Said, shut up, stop, I'm done, enough, sit down. Famous story of the Hawza. Afterwards, Sayyid Burajaddi, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, realized within himself what existed. That power of anger that existed within him could come out at any one moment. And if he could not control it then, imagine tomorrow when it might rear its ugly head. This is no ordinary individual. This has to be a perfect representation of Islam in every moment. To represent the Imam, you have to be as perfect a human being as possible in every given moment. You can't allow yourself to drop that level. Do you know what he did to be able to reform himself? What did he do? He fasted for 1 full year in order to be able to defeat that one moment of weakness within himself.
That's how much effort he put to be able to defeat what was within him. In fact, he actually went and knocked on that student's door at night, apologized, and gave him a gift. According to what I have read, he gave him a gift of maybe a radio or an alarm, something from himself as a way of penance. SubhanAllah. For you and I, the second thing that we can do is to think about what is that one behavior that is so destructive that I need to be able to change, that if I change it, it would actually help me to reevaluate everything in my life, to push me forward in my life. If I can make changes, imagine the potential power within me. Think about this very carefully. The incremental changes that you make within your life to reform yourself, imagine if you can leave something and improve yourself 1 darajah, and then tomorrow another darajah, another darajah. Imagine where you will be in a week, in a month, in a year. What type of new person you could potentially be in. And the third and the last humble recommendation to you when it comes to making islah in our own lives, to prepare ourselves for the islah that is needed to help change the disasters that are afoot, is that when someone else wants to be able to make a change, be an encouragement for them and not a disencouragement or discouragement. Sometimes people want to be able to make a change. You'll want to make a change in your own family, in your own environment, and you won't get support. In fact, people will try to stop you from those changes. Brothers and sisters, don't be that person. When someone wants to make a change, that you are a barrier towards their islah. Imagine on the Day of Judgment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam comes to you and says, brother, sister, this person in your family made a commitment to change, but then you laughed at him. Well, you said, why are you doing that? Why do you want to burden yourself? No, this is not right. This is not possible. Imagine Imam himself comes and says, this was a man that was actually going to move with my movement. You were the one that stopped him. What will you and I do on the Day of Judgment? Some of the changes that we're going to call for in this series will be difficult. For example, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, reason for global warming is the amount of methane that is coming from the industrial farming, the cows that we are eating, the beef that we are producing. Arguably, if we could change this one behavior and reduce the amount of meat, or even stop, if possible, the meat that we were consuming, we could actually help reverse this path that we are on. So tomorrow, someone will walk out of this majlis and say, you know what? The Prophet was right. He only ate meat once every 40 days. Maybe I can do that. So you'll go to your wife, you'll go to your husband, you'll go to your father, you'll go to your mother, and say, I want to make change. Often you want to make change, others will be the impediment. Don't be that person that stops another human being from propelling themselves forward. Brother, if you want to hang back, then you do it, but don't stop someone else from changing their life in the way of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. 3 ways you and I can help reform ourselves. Tonight, your homework is 1. What is the one thing that you can do in your life that will help you to change the behaviors of your life? If you could remove one behavior from your life, or add one behavior into your life, what would it be? How are you going to do it? What are going to be the challenges when you try to achieve that? Whom is going to be a stop? Is it going to be you that's going to stop yourself? Is it going to be someone else? Know the answers to these questions, brothers and sisters, and then come prepared, inshallah, for tomorrow's conversation. This is all I ask for you tonight of your homework. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to be able to perform this islah in our lives. In A night like this, we need to be able to remember what it was like for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to arrive into Karbala. One of the poets says, when I reach you, O Hussein, when I reach you, I will wail and beseech you. Inshallah, you have been to Karbala. Do you remember what it was like when you reached Karbala? Do you remember how your heart felt in such pain when you reached Karbala? Do you remember what it was like when you stood at Qatlaga? Do you remember what it was like when you stood in the maqamat where the arms of Abu Fadil alayhi salam fell? Do you remember how your heart is uneasy just by being in the land, that every step you take, you know there was an arrow fired here at Ali Akbar. You know there was a spear thrown here at Qasim. And every step you take, there is all of this pain and suffering. Do you remember what it was like for you when you reached into the tents, into the mukhayyam, and you sat there listening to the majlis, knowing that in this very place that you sit is where Ruqayya was slapped by Khuli and by Shimr? That in this very place, Zainul Abidin was lying in a state of unconsciousness. That they entered into the tent and shouted out, leave no male alive. That they took out a dagger ready to stab Imam al-Sajjad. And that Zainab alayhi salam had to throw herself in the way of that dagger. Do you remember how you felt when you entered Karbala? I ask you, imagine the pain and the suffering in the heart of Zainab when she entered into Karbala. She asks, oh my brother Hussein, what is this that I am feeling? Why is my heart so heavy in this land? The hadith says, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam responds by saying, oh my sister, do you remember when we were with my father, we were in the battle and we were on our way back, we stopped in this land of Karbala. My father Ali ibn Abi Talib told me that he fell asleep in this location. He saw a dream. When he woke up, he was crying. We came to him and said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, why are you crying? He said, oh Hussein, in my dream, I see it was you in this land. You are drowning in a pool of blood, and there are rabid dogs and wolves around you, snapping their teeth at you. Oh Hussein, how will you be when you are in this land all alone, calling out for help? Hussein responded, Zainab, this is what I said to our father. I said, Ya Ali, my father, you will find me bearing patiently in this trial. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, help us to be able to reform our own lives, make the changes that we wish to be able to make, and especially those changes that are needed to be able to avert the crises that surround us. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin.